Hey, I'm Scott Case, CEO of Malaria No More, and I'm here to be your host for your very first week as a griot. This week we're going to talk about what is malaria, and each week you'll get a different video from a different speaker along the way. So this week I'll be taking you through what is malaria. It's an exciting opportunity and we're really glad you're here. A lot of people don't realize that malaria is still a huge problem in the world, and so I get questions all the time about what is malaria. I didn't know. Didn't we solve this problem already? And malaria is a disease that kills over 3,000 kids every day, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a disease that's spread by mosquitoes, and it's caused by a parasite that lives in the bloodstream of human beings. And so mosquitoes pick up the parasite from one human and deliver it to another human being. In Africa, it's mostly at night, and it mostly kills children under 5 and pregnant women. And that's the tragedy of malaria. The opportunity of malaria is that we have all the tools we need to stop malaria in its tracks, and we can end those needless deaths through very simple prevention tools and really straightforward treatments. So malaria is both a tragedy on the one hand, but an incredible opportunity on the other. While there are lots of issues in the world that are really important, and there are many public health issues, none offers a greater return on investment than malaria. Not only does malaria kill over 3,000 children every day, but it saps the life out of many of the systems in Africa. For example, at the family level, 25% of household income can get spent on malaria treatment. At the community level, 40% of the health clinic resources can get spent dealing with severe malaria. At the country level, 2% of their GDP can be spent on or lost to malaria. And continent-wide, over $12 billion is lost to overall GDP. So the opportunity is not only humanitarian, saving thousands of lives each day, but it's also financial, security risks. There are enormous other benefits to tackling malaria. Malaria starts as a tragedy with an individual person who's infected. A mosquito that's carrying malaria bites a child at night. 7 to 10 days later, they begin to get symptoms: high fever, delirium, vomiting, horrible headache, worse than the worst flu you've ever experienced. It then can lead to cerebral malaria, where the child can end up in a coma and ultimately death. The costs to the family of that are not only the tragedy of waking up in the middle of the night to find your child has a fever and something that could kill them, but they then need to make a choice about whether they can afford to treat them or not. Do they have access to the medicine? How far is the nearest health clinic away? That drives enormous economic costs at the family level, because now they've got to make choices about going to work or treating their child. When they get to that pharmacy or that clinic, do they have the medicine? How expensive is it? Can they spend that money on it? Most families can spend up to 25% of their income just treating malaria alone. Clinics then spend that similar resources, up to 40% of their resources get spent treating severe malaria. And ultimately, community-wide, the resources that could be used for other things are spent dealing with just this one disease. So it has an enormous impact on the family. 30%, actually 30 days a year could be lost in work productivity. Kids can't go to school, they can't help in the fields, families can't do work, families can't plan, because if someone's sick, they don't know how long it's going to take to treat them. It's a huge burden on Africa, and we have an enormous opportunity to lift that burden and really change the game for families, communities, and countries in Africa. The good news is the vast majority of the people in the world aren't exposed to malaria. They're not at risk. For those that are at risk, it's a giant burden. For me personally, I live in a place where I don't have a risk of malaria. The United States solved malaria over 50 years ago with a focused strategy using very similar techniques to the ones that we're trying to use and using in Africa. So for me personally, I've been exposed to the malaria tragedy firsthand by going to Africa. The most recent experience I had was in Senegal, where I went to a health clinic where there was a child that was on intravenous treatment for malaria. They had contracted malaria, their family had brought them to the clinic. She was in and out of consciousness as I sat there. Her parents sat next to her in the bed, just waiting. It was one of the most heart-wrenching experiences for me as a father, is to see parents who are watching their child, any child with tubes coming out of their arms, with a disease that, left unchecked, could kill them within 24 to 48 hours. I don't know of anything more scary than that as a parent. You know, when my children get a high fever, in fact, one recently did, it's nerve-wracking enough, but I know it's unlikely to kill them. And I've got the tools in my medicine cabinet to at least address the basics of it. So for me personally, it comes down to how do we prevent that tragedy from happening? And to know, for me, that that's happening thousands of times a day all throughout Africa. That has a big impact on me personally. There are two major challenges to getting to a place where no one dies from malaria anymore. First, there's leadership. There needs to be leadership at every level. Families not accepting malaria anymore in Africa. Heads of state in Africa wanting to lift the burden off their countries. Donor countries and funders committing that the political will to decide that malaria is not acceptable and we're going to tackle it. So the first great need is a continued leadership on addressing malaria. The second great need is the resources to be able to do the job. It's not enough to just have the leadership. We need to be able to get the resources necessary so that those countries, those villages, and those families have the tools to prevent malaria. The good news is that we have the tools to prevent malaria. We have mosquito nets, we have spraying, we have treatment, we have rapid diagnostic tests. We have the technology and we have the knowledge. What we need is to deploy that knowledge and that technology rapidly and sustain it. And that requires leadership and resources. The average person outside of Africa has an enormous opportunity to help families in Africa protect themselves from malaria. For as little as $10, you can make a donation that will get a mosquito net to a family, teach them the basics of how to use it properly, and start protecting their family immediately. You also can play a role in driving leadership by supporting the message of malaria, whether that's tweeting about it or retweeting messages from organizations like Malaria No More or the Malaria Policy Center or the One Campaign that help get the word out, participating in events and rallies that may happen in your local communities. That all helps to raise the awareness level and help drive leadership. And so you can participate simply by giving $10 or driving your energy and time towards it. And frankly, as griots, you're doing both of those things by participating and bringing others into the fold. So it's really easy to participate. But we need to keep in mind, families in Africa have a role to play too. And so the individual in Africa, an individual citizen, seek out and make sure that you have enough mosquito nets for your family. Demand and make sure that the clinics that you have enough treatments to meet your needs and that there are rapid diagnostic tests, and look to your leaders and hold them accountable. That's a role that individuals can play in Africa. While I get to be your host for this week learning about malaria, I've only touched on the very tip of the iceberg as to what malaria is all about. You're going to get a really in-depth training through the rest of the module and the rest of the details, and the entire griots team can rally together to find out more information and to learn more. So I hope you have a great first module, and I look forward to what's next.